Labour's £122 million asylum secrecy scandal, the hidden cost of Britain's immigration crisis. Right, let's cut straight to the chase, shall we? If you're not already subscribed to UK Connors, hit that subscribe button now because what I'm about to reveal will make your blood boil. And frankly, you'll want to be here when we expose the next political scandal that Westminster desperately hopes you'll ignore. Picture this. You're struggling with rising council tax bills, watching your local services crumble, and wondering where on earth your hard-earned money is disappearing to. Well, buckle up, because Labour has been playing a rather sinister game of hide-and-seek with over £122 million of taxpayer funds, and they've been caught red-handed trying to bury the truth about asylum accommodation costs that are bankrupting our councils. The audacity is breathtaking. Really. Here we have a government that campaigned on transparency and accountability, yet when it comes to revealing how they are distributing millions upon millions to local authorities for asylum housing, suddenly they developed a severe case of selective amnesia. It's almost as if they are operating under the assumption that British taxpayers are too dim to notice when their pockets are being picked clean. But here's where it gets absolutely infuriating. And do subscribe if you haven't already, because this story has more twists and particularly devious episode of House of Cards. Conservative Shadow Minister David Simons has written a scathing letter to the new Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, and his words should send shivers down the spine of every taxpayer in Britain. He has warned that this lack of transparency is deeply concerning, and frankly, that's putting it rather mildly, isn't it? The man's own council in Hillingdon is facing a staggering £17 million shortfall directly attributed to asylum seeker accommodation costs. £17 million. That's not pocket change we're talking about here. That's the equivalent of funding hundreds of teachers, dozens of police officers, or maintaining countless miles of roads that desperately need repair. Instead, it's vanishing into the black hole of Labour's immigration mismanagement. And guess who's left holding the bill? You are. Through increased council tax that's hitting families when they can least afford it. Now, before you think this is just political point scoring, and please, do hit that subscribe button if you're finding this as outrageous as I am. Let's examine the cold, hard numbers that Labour would prefer you never see. When they took office in July, there were 29,585 asylum seekers housed in hotels. Fast forward to the end of June this year, and that number has actually increased to 32,059. So much for their grand promises of reducing hotel usage. But wait, it gets worse. The total number of people receiving asylum support has jumped from 100,995 to 106,075 during this period. These aren't just statistics on a spreadsheet. These represent real costs falling on real communities across Britain, costs that Labour is desperately trying to keep hidden from public scrutiny. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp has absolutely nailed the issue with characteristic precision. Labour are turning every corner of Britain into a dumping ground for their asylum crisis. And is not wrong, is he? Communities across the country are waking up to find their neighborhoods fundamentally transformed overnight, with no consultation, no warning, and certainly no consideration for the impact on local residents who've lived there for decades. Think about it. You've built your life in a community. You know your neighbors. Your children go to local schools. You use local services. Then suddenly, without so much as a bio leave, you discover that a nearby hotel has been converted into asylum accommodation, stretching already limited resources to breaking point and fundamentally altering the character of your area. The absolute disregard for community cohesion is staggering. And here's a kicker that should make every subscriber, and do subscribe if you haven't already, absolutely livid. Families are being rendered powerless in their own neighborhoods. Local voices are systematically ignored. And when residents dare to raise concerns, they are dismissed as somehow lacking compassion or understanding. It's a masterclass in political gaslighting that would make Orwell weep. The financial burden is crippling local authorities across the nation. Council budgets that were already stretched to breaking point are now buckling under the additional pressure of accommodation costs that Westminster refuses to fully fund. The result? Services are cut, roads go unrepaired, libraries close, and council tax bills sort of compensate for the shortfall. It's a vicious cycle that's destroying the very fabric of local government finance. But Labour's response to this crisis? More secrecy, more obfuscation, and more attempt to bury inconvenient truths. They are treating British taxpayers like mushrooms, keeping them in the dark and feeding them a steady diet of political fertilizer. The contempt is palpable. David Simmons has posed a question that cuts to the heart of the scandal. What exactly are ministers trying to hide by keeping this information secret? Because make no mistake, when a government refuses to reveal how it's spending your money, there's usually a very good reason, and it's rarely one that reflects well on them. The hotel accommodation figures tell a damning story of policy failure. Remember, the peak was 56,042 people in hotels at the end of September 2023. Despite all the rhetoric about reducing these numbers, despite all the promises about fixing the asylum system, the reality is that thousands upon thousands are still languishing in expensive hotel accommodation at enormous cost to the taxpayer. A government spokesperson had the brass neck to claim they decreased the hotel bill by around £1 billion and promised to close all asylum hotels before the end of this parliament. But here's the thing about political promises. They're worth precisely as much as the paper they are printed on, and given Labour's track record on immigration, forgive me if I'm not holding my breath. Chris Philpott proposed a solution that's as straightforward as it is controversial. Fix this by deporting every single illegal arrival. His logic is unassailable. Without deportations, there is no deterrence. Without deterrence, the boats will never stop. It's a hard truth that many in Westminster would prefer to ignore, but ignoring inconvenient realities won't make them disappear. The human cost of this policy failure extends far beyond mere numbers. Real communities are being transformed without consent. Real families are watching their neighborhoods change beyond recognition, and real taxpayers are footing an ever-increasing bill for a system that appears designed to fail. The social contract between government and governed is being systematically shredded. What's particularly galling is the way Labour has weaponized compassion to shut down legitimate concerns. Raise questions about the financial burden on your council, and you're lacking empathy. Point out the strain on local services, and you're somehow prejudiced. Question the lack of consultation with affected communities, and you're branded as unwelcoming. It's political manipulation of the highest order. The secrecy surrounding the distribution of that £122 million isn't just about transparency, it's about accountability. Without knowing how these funds are allocated, taxpayers cannot determine whether their money is being spent efficiently or fairly. Some councils may be receiving adequate compensation, while others are left to struggle with massive shortfalls. The postcode lottery of asylum accommodation costs is creating winners and losers across the country, and nobody knows who's who. This deliberate opacity serves Labour's political interests perfectly. By keeping the true costs hidden, they can continue to claim they are managing the crisis effectively while local authorities bear the brunt of public anger over service cuts and tax rises. It's a cynical strategy that throws local councillors under the bus to protect ministers in Westminster. The implications extend far beyond immediate financial concerns. When councils are forced to cut services to accommodate unfunded asylum costs, it's often the most vulnerable members of society who suffer first. Children's services, elderly care, mental health support, all become casualties of a system that prioritizes political expedience over genuine public service. Subscribe to UK Connors if you haven't already, because this story represents everything wrong with modern British politics. The secrecy, the contempt for taxpayers, the willful ignorance of community concerns, and the absolute determination to avoid accountability at any cost. Labour's handling of asylum accommodation funding is a masterclass in how not to govern a democracy. The truth that Labour is so desperately trying to bury is simple. Their immigration policies are bankrupting local councils, destroying community cohesion, and forcing taxpayers to subsidize a system that serves everyone's interests except their own. The £122 million they are hiding is just the tip of an iceberg that threatens to sink local government finance entirely. So there you have it. Labour's asylum accommodation scandal laid bare. They promised transparency and delivered secrecy. They pledged to fix the immigration system and made it worse. They vowed to respect local communities and ignored them entirely. It's a hat trick of political failure that would be impressive if it weren't so damaging to our country. The question now is whether British voters will hold them accountable for this betrayal of trust, or whether Labour will succeed in burying the truth until it's too late to matter. That choice, ultimately, is yours to make. Subscribe to UK Connors to stay ahead of the political curve, because in Westminster, today's buried scandal is tomorrow's front-page crisis, and you'll want to be ready when it hits.